All right, cool. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming today. This is part 2 of our Healthy Gut webinar series, and it's all about the fascinating and intricate mind-gut connection. My name is Lindsay Cosma, and I am, as you'll see, extremely passionate about our topic today. I'm actually finishing up a master's degree from Tufts University in nutrition science and policy, and I'm currently working on a thesis in this area. So on how the makeup of our gut can influence what we choose to eat. So I've spent many, many hours researching this topic. And I'm also the director of brand and content marketing at Foodsmart, where we connect people with dietitians to make personalized nutrition education accessible for everyone. So lots of time spent learning about gut health and lots of time thinking about practical ways to get people information that actually helps them make their lives better and be healthier. So before we jump into the meat of the presentation today, for all of you who are attending today, we are doing, as usual, an exciting giveaway. So we switched up some of the prizes from last time. And basically by scheduling a visit with a dietitian using the code, I believe that should be MindGut. So typo on my part. The code is MindGut. So by the end of today, we're going to draw one winner to receive their choice of either a Ninja Creamy, which I just got one of these, and they really are sold out for a reason. It's an ice cream maker. You can make ice cream out of yogurt or cottage cheese or all kinds of cool stuff. So that's an option, a Mise en Chef knife, or your choice of an Amazon $250 gift card. So yeah, again, code is MindGut. And if this is your first visit, you will also get a $15 Amazon gift card guaranteed. So Maddie, if you don't mind dropping the link and the code in the chat, and I can give everyone a minute to crash our site and go schedule those visits. And then we will jump into stuff. So the code, again, is MindGut. Sorry for the typo. And the URL is on the screen, and we'll also drop it in the chat. Thanks, Maddie. So you just did that. Cool. And we'll be dropping that in periodically. So if you want to hang on, do it in a sec, that's fine too. But yeah, we can go ahead and jump right on in. All right. So if you missed part 1 of the series, Maddie actually was our host, and she went over gut health basics. So an overview of digestion and the players involved, common gut health related conditions, as well as recommendations about what to include, avoid, or consider including in your diet. And we'll also drop a link at some point to that recording of that webinar in the chat, and highly encourage all of you to go give it a watch. You can totally watch them out of order. It's just a really great practical overview of gut health. So to build on that today, we are going to zoom into the relationship between our brain and our gut. And we'll spend a little bit more time orienting ourselves around the who, what, and where the microbiome is and how that is connected to the brain. Then we will look at one direction. So all of the signals that begin in the gut and that go to the brain. And then we'll reverse it and briefly talk about a few mental conditions, specifically anxiety, stress, and depression, and how those can affect digestion. And then along the way, I'm going to be sharing some hacks and tips that you can use to, use that connection to your advantage for better overall health. And then finally, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. I'll do my best to answer your burning questions that you drop in the chat throughout the presentation. So that is what is on the agenda today. Sound good to everyone? All right. I am going to, yeah, all right, cool. So where is the microbiome exactly? We hear this word, it's sort of nebulous. Let's talk a little bit about where it is. So last time Maddie gave a simple overview of our digestive system. So how it begins in the mouth, goes into the stomach and into the intestines and out the other side. I have amended that drawing to make some distinguishments for our conversation today. Primarily, differentiating between the large and small intestine, and also adding in the brain. which is somewhat of an accessory digestive organ in the context of our talk today. So this is the digestive system, what it all looks like. And then you may recognize this slide from last time as well, but we looked at the three main components of digestion. So we have enzymes, which you have throughout your digestive tract, in your mouth, in your stomach, in your small intestine. We have acid, which is ideally only in your stomach. And then we have bacteria, which is our focus of today. And bacteria are one of the major components of digestion. And then a very important distinction for our conversation today, the gut microbiome is only located in the large intestine. It's very important that it stays there, right? If they creep up into the small intestine, you get something called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is very bad. So we don't want that. We want them to stay in the large intestine. And when it comes to digestion, remember the small intestine comes first. So food leaves the stomach, it enters the small intestine where it's broken down and most of those nutrients are absorbed. And what isn't absorbed, so think our insoluble fibers like plant material, water, electrolytes, and then any other nutrients that aren't broken down, those enter the large intestine and into this complex ecosystem of bacteria and other organisms that interact with those materials in a variety of ways. All right, so let's explore a little bit deeper the microbiome. All right, so it's really important to understand when we start looking at the connection between the gut and the brain, who's talking? What are sending these signals back and forth and interacting with our biology? And when we talk about the who, this is actually called our microbiota. And there are trillions of organisms in your microbiota inside your large intestine right now. And actually, that's more microbial cells in your body than cells of your body or that make up your body. So talk about an identity crisis. Nonetheless, primarily we are talking about bacteria, as this is kind of the largest component of the microbiota, but there are certainly other things. Fungi, protists, things called archaea, algae, can also be viruses, not ideally, and parasites, not ideally. But generally, the who is referred to as your microbiota. And each person's microbiota is unique, like a fingerprint. And although, there are some commonalities in the composition of gut microbes, they really vary from person to person. And things like genetics, your diet, your lifestyle, the environment where you live or were born, and even birth method, so how you were born, those all can influence the development and diversity of your gut microbiota. And so we have microbiota, and then it's the who is there, plus the location where they live, in this case, the gut, and then the effects or what they do or their functionality. And that whole system together, that is what is called your microbiome. And there are microbiomes in different areas on your body, in your mouth, on your skin. And then obviously today we're talking about your gut microbiome. Next slide, please. There we go. All right, so let's look at who's talking. You have trillions of microbes in there. What are they doing in there? Well, it's much more than just digesting our food. So here are a few of their impressive functions. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I will read a couple of these and then we will go through a lot of them in much more detail in the coming slides. But as I said, they do break down your food. So they help break down some complex carbohydrates that our bodies can't digest on its own. So they aid in digestion. They also can create vitamins from undigested food in times of deficiency, which is really interesting. Say you're deficient in a certain vitamin, your microbiome can sense that and they can create those vitamins to help support. There's restrictions or kind of, limits to that, but that is one of their interesting functions. And then they also can produce immune molecules. They can support the immune system and they can influence inflammation. And they also produce neurotransmitters. and other molecules that can affect our mood and cognition and function. So basically the overview is they break down our food and they create lots of different compounds and chemicals, either immune things, hormones, neurotransmitters, all of these things that interact with our biology. And we'll go into detail a little bit more next.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Lindsay. Before we get into our next section, we are working on enabling the chat for me. So once I can get that working, I'll send that link out to you in just a moment. So for everybody who's asking for the link, hang tight. We are building some suspense. And once I get my chat working, I will drop that link for all of you. So no worries. We haven't forgotten about you. I see what you're adding there. And without further ado, I'm going to skip us to our next section and pass it back to Lindsay.
Yeah. I think everything's enabled for everyone. So if this is a me thing, Maddie, let me know and I'll try to do some tech stuff.
All right, we are back in action. And now without further ado, here is that link for all of you that you have been asking for. And while I drop that in, I'll pass it back to you to continue on. Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Cool. So that gave me time to have a sip of my tea. So thanks. Great.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
Great. All right, so we are going to now look at one direction of this sort of relationship. So how the gut affects mood, cognition, and mental health. Before we jump into that, I do want to take a second just to define something that I'm going to be referencing a bunch in the coming slides, and that is gut dysbiosis, which is the unfavorable, so not what we want, unfavorable imbalance in the types or amounts of bacteria and organisms present in the microbiome, which causes unwanted effects. So there are a lot of specific conditions and issues that we can talk about, but gut dysbiosis just refers to something being generally off or not at optimal health. Oops. Sorry, having a phone call. All right, great. So let's look at now we know where the microbiome is and kind of who's living there. But we'll talk about how these microbes are interacting with us, with our cells and our body processes and our brain. Communication between the gut and the brain is actually bidirectional, which means it goes both ways. But actually messages sent from the gut to the brain are much stronger than those sent from the brain down to the gut. So that actually further illuminates just how influential the gut is on our brain and overall health. And much of this communication is done via the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve connecting the brainstem to various organs, but especially the gut. So you basically have a direct line from your brain to your gut and vice versa. All right. Now, I've just said that the gut primarily communicates with the brain via the vagus nerve, which is true. But that does give us a little bit of a limited view. Now, the reality is that the gut communicates with the brain in a lot of other ways. It makes hormones, bacteria digest our food and create all kinds of metabolites or chemicals that interact with our body in beneficial and sometimes harmful ways, and so on. And so I think, the gut-brain connection can seem kind of nebulous and sort of hard to conceptualize. And it does help, I think, to dip our toes into the science for just a second. And I promise we'll come back up for air, but just to really wrap our minds around just how influential the gut actually is to our well-being. So there are actually 4 main ways that our gut communicates with our brain. The first way is the neurologic pathway. Now, the gut can produce neurotransmitters that travel along the vagus nerve. And that's part of it. It can produce a lot of other neurotransmitters. And then the second is the endocrine pathway. And when you hear endocrine, that is hormones. And hormones affect everything, as you may know, from mood to sleep to stress and a lot more. The third one is something called the metabolic pathway. And in the same way that we digest our food for energy, and we call that our metabolism, this pathway is looking at what happens when the bacteria further digest substances and then produce something called metabolites. which have all kinds of effects in our bodies. And then the fourth one is called the immune pathway. So all along the lining of our gut is something called GALT, or gut-associated lymphoid tissue, AKA this is a direct line to our immune system. And what happens in the gut affects our systemic immune system, meaning the immune system for our entire body. So we are going to spend some time on each of these in the following slides to better grasp just how the gut communicates along all of these pathways to affect our brain. Alrighty, so the gut is the second brain. Lots of scientists, researchers refer to the gut as a second brain. And this is largely because the gut is absolutely integrated into our neurological system, as we talked about via the vagus nerve as kind of the main connection there, but also because it produces some of the same neurotransmitters that our brains do. So I want to focus on a few, the first being GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid. You don't need to know that. GABA is a calming hormone that plays a role in controlling anxiety, stress, and fear. So our gut produces a calming hormone that can impact whether we feel anxiety, stress, and fear. The second one is serotonin. So perhaps one of the more surprising facts is that the gut produces 95% of total body serotonin. Now, total body serotonin doesn't mean it all goes to the brain. Some of it acts locally in the intestines, some of it exists in plasma, but a lot of it does actually go and connect directly to our central nervous system and our brains. And serotonin is best known as the feel-good hormone, and that plays a role in happiness, but it can also impact learning, memory. It can help regulate body temperature, sleep, hunger, and digestion. So serotonin's hugely important, and almost 100% of it is made within our gut, which is pretty crazy. And then we have dopamine. So another happy hormone. And again, around 50% of this is made in your gut. Dopamine helps control anxiety, stress, and fear as well. And obviously, in large amounts, it makes you feel really happy. And then we have histamine. So a little bit of a different genre here, but you might be familiar with something called antihistamines, which help with like allergies. But histamines are also in the body, and they do the opposite. So when produced in high amounts, it can actually cause a lot of inflammation. And high histamine has been associated with a number of neurodevelopmental disorders. So if you think about the gut produces these things for our bodies, what do you think happens when we have something like gut dysbiosis? When we have, different amount or types of bacteria that are less than optimal in our gut? Right. So these levels can be affected, and those have effects on our mood, fear, anxiety, etc. And that really holds true for all of these here. So when things are out of whack, these things are not produced in inadequate levels, and those can have impacts on our mental health. Next, we have hormones. So let's look at a few hormones produced in the gut and how they can affect the brain. First, let's talk about melatonin. I bet many of you are familiar with this. Maybe you have even taken melatonin over the counter to help with sleep, but it's actually a hormone that we produce, and our guts produce it. So again, if our gut is out of whack, we might not be getting enough melatonin, which can interfere with our sleep. And sleep certainly affects cognitive function, as maybe you've all experienced without a night of sleep, or an overnight flight, or having a newborn child. Like, when our sleep's affected, we're not going to be thinking and our best and as sharp as we usually would be. So the gut affects that production and is really integral in our sleep-wake cycles and regulation. Then we have cortisol and norepinephrine. So cortisol is related to chronic stress. So if we have high cortisol, we are in a state of continued stress over time. And the norepinephrine affects, our cognitive function. So think concentration, focus, and memory. And a lack of norepinephrine has been associated with brain fog. So if you've experienced brain fog, it's sort of just like kind of what it sounds like, but cloudiness, you're not really able to think clearly, you can't recall things very well. So norepinephrine has been associated with that. And then we shift gears a little bit to talk about something related to digestion. So leptin and ghrelin, or as I like to call them, Tweedle don't eat and Tweedle do eat. Leptin is a hormone that causes satiety or causes you to feel full and therefore not hungry and decreased appetite. Ghrelin is the opposite of that, as it causes hunger. And you can remember this by thinking of sort of stomach ghrelin or stomach growling. Ghrelin is actually produced in the stomach and leptin in something called the gastric mucosa, or the lining throughout your gut, but they do travel to the brain via the vagus nerve, and they influence appetite and ultimately eating behavior, or overeating or undereating. There's actually a couple of fascinating studies that are done on what are called germ-free mice, where germ-free mice that have basically no gut microbiome, receive fecal transplants from wild mice that have all different kinds of diets. And the germ-free mice actually adopt the same food preferences as the wild mice. So let's say a wild mice only ate clover, then the germ-free mouse would prefer clover just based on that microbiome. So really interesting. Another study on mice as well, where mice are given antibiotics, which reduce their gut diversity by about 50%. And then these mice then start overeating, and they mostly choose sugars, carbs, fats. And then they receive probiotics to restore some of that diversity, and we see that their diet normalized. So they stopped overeating, and they stopped choosing some of those like higher sugar and higher fat foods. So interesting things. Remember, these are mice studies, not humans. And there's still some research to be done about exactly how this might work or could work in humans. But nonetheless, when we're talking about the mind-gut connection, to think that the gut could affect not only how much we eat, but also what we choose to eat is pretty fascinating. And again, I said a lot of research is being done there. So, yeah. All right. So the metabolic pathway. If you remember, I described this as kind of what the bacteria produce, called metabolites, when they consume our food. So this is actually one of the more complex pathways. So for today, I just want to look at one pretty active metabolite that is produced called short chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. SCFAs have some really important roles in basically keeping the function of our gut-brain connection healthy. They basically go into our gut cells, or enterocytes, and they provide them with energy. They ensure the lining of our gut is sealed so we don't have leaky gut. And they also do similar things to brain cells. They basically clean up and make sure everything's working properly with our cells. They also support nerve cell function. So like the vagus nerve and all the other thousands of nerves in our body, which help ensure all of those messages from that neurological pathway from our gut to our brain get where they're going, and vice versa. So they help communicate those messages. And then SCFAs, they have a lot of other functions which are continually being researcch, like their role in regulating hormones that are produced in the gut. So some of the stuff we talked about in the endocrine pathway, their impact on appetite, and some really interesting research on brain development in children and overall brain function. So SCFAs are continually being researched, are really interesting bacterial metabolite that comes from our gut and has lots of interesting effects on our brain. All right, last one, and then we can come up for air. Immune system, immune pathway. So did you know that 70 or 80% of our immune system actually resides in and around our gut? Pretty cool. It's supposed that one reason for this is that it's in our very best interest that these trillions of microbes stay where they are and they don't go where they're not supposed to be. So we want them to stay on their side and we stay on our side. But immune function of the gut is vast. They actually create antibodies, immune cells, something called cytokines, which maybe you heard of in the context of COVID, and a lot more. But for today, as it relates to the brain, a lot of what we know about the immune function on the brain is actually related to inflammation. So many studies show that an association here. So if you think about a gut dysbiotic condition like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, that can actually cause gut permeability. which means that things inside the gut get outside of the gut, and they get to that first line of defense, which is our GALT, or our gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which is our immune system. And so when things get outside of the gut, they get into our immune system flares up in response, and that is called inflammation. Now, this inflammation can just be near the gut, which, as we learned, can cause dysbiosis, and dysbiosis can affect the brain. But also, the inflammation can affect the rest of the body. So it starts near the gut, but it can become systemic, and systemic inflammation can affect cognition, focus, memory, and brain fog. And it's also commonly seen alongside patients who have depression, anxiety, or panic disorders. So not to say that it caused those things, but to say someone with depression, we often see inflammation alongside that condition. Whew. All right. So we can come for air now. Wasn't that fun? I said we'd only dip a toe in, but maybe it was more like a foot, but I hope that helps put a little bit more meat on the bones. So when you hear mind-gut connection, as I said, it can be a little bit hard to conceptualize what that means, but as you've seen, the gut actually has an immense amount of influence on our overall well-being, and especially on our brain health. So now you know all of this, but what can you actually do about it? How can you use some of this understanding to improve your gut health, and in turn, possibly also your brain health? Well, the good news is you don't need to know about SCFAs or remember necessarily what pathway went well where. So we'll talk about some of those practical steps that you can take. All right. So what makes a healthy gut? Now, we've talked a lot about dysbiosis, but what actually makes a healthy gut? Well, there are a few things that we know. You want to have high diversity in the types of bacteria that are present. And we know that less diversity is associated with all kinds of diseases. So diversity is good. That means high variety in types of bacteria and organisms that are there. You also, maybe this is intuitive, but you want more good bacteria than bad bacteria. So within that diversity, we want to make sure that a lot of it are strains of bacteria that we know are beneficial. And you want balance too within that good bacteria. So there is such thing as too much of a good thing. And when you have things that are supposed to be there, but in too much abundance, that can also cause some issues. So you're looking for balance. You also want a healthy mucosal lining. So all the way from your mouth, all the way through, we want it to be all sealed up, all, coated in this mucosal lining, which keeps all of your food moving along smoothly, keeps everything where it should be. You don't have leaky gut, and you're more resilient to what you do eat. So we want to make sure that function of the gut is in check. We want to have regular motility, not too fast, not too slow, but just right. We know that when things are too slow, they can tend to ferment in the gut, and that's not great. When they're too fast, we don't absorb as many nutrients, things aren't processed correctly. So we want to be regular in our motility. And we want to also have good upper GI digestion. So if you go back to the digestion map, you want food that enters your large intestine which is your microbiome, to be broken down enough that it can, be processed effectively. So how do you achieve a healthy gut? Now, you may remember this if you did go to part 1. Maddie spent a lot of time going over these points in part 1. So again, encourage you to check that out. But in general, these are the guidelines where you should focus. And we know that all of these things are proven to affect the things on the previous slide. For example, eating fiber increases diversity, eating colorful fruits and veggies increases diversity, and so on. But these are sort of, if we distill it, we come all the way back out from all the science. These are the things that have been shown to cause or improve a healthy gut. So the first one is eating a variety of colorful fruits and veggies. That's maybe, the most standard advice across the board for everything, but really it matters because, like I said, diversity in your gut is important. Diversity in the food that we eat creates diversity in the gut. So very important. We want to aim for about 25 grams of fiber per day. And again, Maddie went into this in detail, but there's two types of fiber. You've got soluble and insoluble. Soluble are things like oats, beans, peas, apples, things that hold water. And then insoluble are some of those indigestible fibers that our bacteria eat. So think like nuts, stringy vegetables, greens, broccoli, carrots, those sorts of things. Next, we want to, consider trying some fermented foods. Again, Maddie touched on the topic of probiotics and prebiotics and all of that, but in general, using or trying naturally fermented foods are much more easily tolerated. There's actually some research to show that getting probiotics through fermented foods are more beneficial in increasing diversity because they're naturally diverse, right? So fermented foods include things like yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkrauts, or kombucha. Next thing is limiting your intake of lots of sugary foods and beverages or overly processed foods. So sugary foods can be inflammatory, but generally these things can be tough to digest. And sugar in particular, it feeds gut bacteria, and that means feeds good gut bacteria and bad gut bacteria. So unless your microbiome is sort of perfectly in balance, which is not the majority of people, limiting your sugar can be a beneficial thing. Next is staying hydrated. So aiming for half of your body weight in fluid ounces of water per day. So hydration helps keep that mucosal lining that we talked about great. It helps with regular motility. And so if you're, a 150-pound person, aiming for about 75 fluid ounces of water per day should be sort of your minimum. And then last, getting 30 minutes of aerobic exercise per day. So again, moving your body, increasing your blood flow helps on all fronts, right? But it also helps with your gut motility and digestion overall. So making sure that you are moving throughout the day. All right. So all of that sounds great, but really your gut health is super complex, right? So I can give you these general guidelines. And even if you're following all those to a T, maybe you're still experiencing issues or symptoms. And this is where working with a professional, a registered dietitian is a great next step. And it's because they consider your unique situation, your food preferences, your aversions, your gut health and health history, whether you've had any gut conditions like, celiac or Crohn's or IBS, or other conditions like blood pressure issues, diabetes, all sorts of things. They consider your entire picture of your health, and they can take those guidelines and really customize them specifically for you. And that's really where we see, really great impact with how nutrition can be used as a tool for better gut health. So, again, another reminder that we're giving away a $250 prize just to one person who schedules a visit today using the code MINDGUT. So again, find that link in the chat and reach out, meet with a dietitian. We are covered by a lot of insurance plans, and you can check that as you are scheduling your visit. But it's a great thing to do just to get kind of a baseline understanding of, where you should be focusing based on your unique health. All right. So as promised, we are going to spend a few slides looking at the other direction. So the connection from the brain to the gut. And we're going to focus primarily on two kinds of mental health categories. So stress and anxiety, which I am grouping together for this conversation, and then depression. So who here has ever felt stressed or anxious? What about overwhelmed, fearful, nervous? Yeah, I thought so. Me too. Everyone, right? Stress and anxiety and this type of mental state can severely affect the gut and our digestion. And there's actually a lot that we do know about this kind of genre of mental health issue. It's been shown to impact gut dysbiosis by changing the types and amounts of bacteria in the gut. When we're stressed, we are in sympathetic fight or flight state, as opposed to something called parasympathetic or rest and digest state. And this shunts all of our blood flow to our extremities to run or move quickly, as well as to vital organs like our heart and our brain. And definitely not the gut. Body is not prioritizing digesting food when it is in fight or flight mode. And when we have poor blood flow to the gut, we don't digest food completely. We can feel bloated, we can feel uncomfortable. So it's not ideal to for digestion or to digest food when you are in a stressed state. It can also change gut motility, or how food and what speed food moves through our gut. Because sometimes acute stress or fear causes things to move too fast, while chronic stress causes things to slow way down. Stress and anxiety can also make you more sensitive to certain foods like sugar, alcohol, even if they're things you could normally tolerate okay, can make you more sensitive. That comes down to kind of, again, some of that gut mucosa being disrupted, things like leaky gut, things just aren't really working in the way that they should be. And generally it throws the microbiome out of balance. An interesting note about stress that I kind of alluded to earlier, short and long-term stress have different effects. So short-term stress, like being in an accident, that causes adrenaline, and that really ramps up your fight or flight. And this can temporarily halt appetite, as I said, and digestion. And a little bit more of a fun fact, if you've ever felt butterflies in your stomach before an event or public speaking or hosting a webinar, that's actually adrenaline causing your stomach muscles to spasm really fast. So it feels like butterflies. And then we have long-term or something called chronic stress. So like being stressed every day at work for months and months, that releases another hormone called cortisol, which can increase appetite actually, and actually motivate you to consume foods that are higher in fat and sugar. So it's interesting that, the degree or the length of time that you feel stressed can actually have totally different effects on your body. And then we have depression. Depression in the relationship to the gut is a little less well understood, but it's an area, that we do have a few correlations that we tend to see. So one of those is we do see reduced amounts of good bacteria present in those with depression. We also tend to see reduced motility, so constipation, and associated sort of discomfort and side effects that go along with that. We also tend to see changes in normal appetite, and that can vary from person to person. It could either be disinterest in eating entirely, or food cravings for comfort foods. So again, the high sugar, high fat types of foods. We also see an interesting, phenomenon, heightened pain sensitivity. So, if a person experiences those types of gut symptoms, they actually feel worse than someone without depression. And if you note on the slide, one of the not so fun facts is that 50 to 80% of IBS or irritable bowel syndrome patients have depression as well. Again, not sure whether, what caused what, but there is an association there. And so again, if you have IBS, you're having lots of, discomfort and symptoms, and you also have depression, that can just feel generally worse. So not good stuff. And then you can also have disruptions in GABA. So remember we talked about GABA, it's the calming hormone. You can have disruptions in GABA, serotonin, and dopamine. And that can also disrupt digestion. So if you remember, those things are often produced in the gut, and depression can cause disruptions there. So a lot of the current research is trying to isolate what about the gut might cause depression, referencing recent findings that certain bacteria are only in or are common in those with depression. And there's also an interesting study where rats, again, I know lots of rodent things, but things are easier to prove in rodents, but where rats received fecal transplants from humans with major depression, and they actually became disinterested in pleasurable activities. So there's something going on there. And again, the things we've listed off are things that we, connections that we do know, but still certainly more research to be done there. And as I kind of mentioned, it's not a one-way street. It's hard to isolate cause and effect because, for example, eating lots of comfort food, sugar, for example, affects the gut, which could then affect the brain and exacerbate depression and so on. And so it's why this one's sort of difficult to understand and isolate as compared to, stress and anxiety. But, we do know, as I said, there's a connection there. And, again, we know that improving your gut health overall is good for your total body. And so if there can be supportive or beneficial effects on your mental health, including depression, then to me, it's sort of a why not sort of thing. So, all right. So let's talk about some practical tips that we can employ on the mental health side for better digestion. Obviously, Foodsmart and my expertise is on the digestion and gut health side, but there are some things that we know can help just, when thinking about your mental state going into eating or things like that, that can help you improve your digestion. So one of those things is slowing down and focusing on your food. Sounds kind of intuitive, but everyone's moving so fast. Everyone's grabbing snacks and things on the go. And it actually does have an impact because, your body recognizes hunger and fullness cues based on where your mind is focused. So if you're focused on eating, it tells your brain, hey, I'm eating. And it helps you recognize when you are full and to stop eating or whether you're still hungry. The next one is take a few deep breaths before eating. There's something called box breathing that is kind of easy to get. It's basically an inhale for 4 breaths, a hold at the top for 4 breaths, an exhale for 4 breaths, and a hold at the bottom for 4 breaths. So it's really like a square. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. If you do that a few times, that's been shown to actually transition the body from maybe a sympathetic or fight or flight state and into a parasympathetic rest and digest state, which is where you want to be while you were eating. So slow down, focus on your food, take a few deep breaths before eating. The next one is maybe not making a lot of friends with this one, but stop scrolling. It is actually a stressor. If you are, your brain tells your body to release digestive enzymes when it knows that you're eating. And when you are focused on other things, when you're scrolling, when you're watching TV, it's not focused on what you're doing. And it is sort of a low grade stressor, right? So kind of back to the first point, putting away distractions and actually focusing on your food. The next one is a little bit like how to focus on your food. Food's really good, right? We love food. So use your senses, smell, flavor, taste, texture, temperature, all of those pleasurable senses increase blood flow, decrease cortisol, and that gives you a boost in your digestion. So enjoy your food. And then the last one's, don't talk about your stressful day while you're eating. I know lots of, couples or families kind of gather at the end of a day at the dinner table. And I know it's tempting to kind of talk about stressful things, but it is actually counterproductive when it comes to your digestion. So maybe save those conversations for another time and focus on things that are, a little less stressful while you are eating. All right. So we have reached the end. I hope that you learned something. Actually, please drop a fact that you learned in the chat. I'd be interested to see kind of like one interesting thing that you took away that maybe you didn't know before today. I'm actually going to take a second and just see if anyone has any interesting things that they learned, because I'm curious. So many new facts. Let's hear one.
Lindsay, my favorite fact coming off of mute is just the realization I had that so many things that we say in our culture day to day come from the connection between our brain and our bodies, but specifically our gut, like butterflies in your stomach, scared out of your skin, like those sorts of phrases all come from the knowledge we've had for decades and decades about how connected our mind is to our body. But the research is just coming out more and more now, even though our bodies have known intuitively all this time. That's just wild to me.
For sure. I know the butterflies in your stomach. There's a couple other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are a lot of little kind of phrases that we use that do make that connection. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Lots of people in the chat. Thanks, Maddie.
Yeah. People saying in the chat too, like that they're surprised about the amount of immune cells that are in your gut and how your gut can produce and create hormones, not that it just gets them, that they can produce it too. I think that those are some really big takeaways people have had, and just the general connection between your gut and your brain, that it's a real actual thing. That's amazing that people learn so much.
Yeah, it is a real actual thing. And I know we did go heavy on the science today, and we usually keep these pretty practical, but like I said a bunch, the connection is vast. And so I hope that that's what you all got out of today. Yeah. Boost 90% of body serotonin's in the gut. Totally. Talking about stressful things does affect your digestion. Ghrelin, stomach ghrelin increases appetite. Yep.
I love, somebody just said that, they learned distracted eating is just as bad for you as distracted driving. That's 100% right. I'm one of those people that's like, oh, I'm a great multitasker. And I feel very strongly and confidently about that until I look at my work when I'm multitasking and realize, oh, maybe I'm not as good at that as I think. And food is no exception. So I'm glad that was a takeaway for a lot of folks. It's awesome.
Totally. Too much of a good thing is not good. Yeah. It's not intuitive. You think like more probiotics, more good things. Actually, maybe not. Microbiomes are everywhere. They totally are. Yeah. Thanks for sharing this. I'm going to look through these afterwards. Yeah, but generally, what you guys are sharing is what I hope that you're taking away. So understanding, who, what, where is the microbiome and microbiota for that matter. And that the brain and gut are inextricably linked, and the health of one is influenced by the health of the other. That gut microbes can digest our food. They can produce chemicals, hormones, neurotransmitters, immune compounds, all things that interact with our biology and our brain. And that reducing stress and anxiety with some of those simple tips can actually improve your gut health and digestion. And that keeping the gut healthy by, following some of those guidelines that we shared, by meeting with a dietitian to get even more sort of personalized information, can really influence your mental health, mood, and cognition. It's not just limited to your gut health. So as I said before, obviously there are many reasons why you might want to improve your gut health for, maybe you're experiencing gut symptoms or your digestion. But if you're also having some of these mental health issues, stress, anxiety, even depression, focusing on your gut health could be beneficial, right? And there's kind of no harm in doing so because of how much we know the gut affects our overall health, and having a healthy gut matters. So that is it as far as takeaways. And I hope that you guys learned something. I think we have a few minutes for questions, but yeah, thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you learned a ton. Again, don't forget to schedule a visit by the end of today using that code, and potentially win one of our awesome prizes. Yeah, so let's jump into some questions. Gosh, you guys are killing it. 65 new messages. It's more text than I've had in 3 months.
Lots and lots of key takeaways, which I'm so glad to hear. One of the questions that is popping up right now is, can we have the link to the first session? Yes, I am putting that in the chat in just a moment. Give me 1 second and I will add that. And another question that's coming through is, can we watch this talk and is there a link? Yep, you will be able to rewatch this. We are recording and we will post that on our YouTube channel. You will get a follow-up email within a day or so after this webinar, where you will get the link to rewatch this specific webinar, but also the link for the previous one too. So hang tight. I'll add the previous link in a moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Maddie. All right. I'm looking through learnings for questions. Maddie, did you see any come through? You can throw them at me.
Yep. I sent you some of the questions that were coming through as we were getting them. And one question that we can tackle, I think together, Lindsay, is a great place to start. And there were a lot of comments about this, and I hear this all the time. Someone said, I got referred to an RD and they haven't been helpful. I saw an RD out in the wild, so to speak, and all they talked about was eating more veggies and low FODMAP. And then there were also a lot of questions about why aren't RDs, if they're so important, look at all that we've learned today, why aren't they working with more doctors or specialists? Why do we have to, seek elsewhere for dietitians? And I'll jump in to start here, just saying that registered dietitians, there are a lot of us, but oftentimes when we're working in person at different offices, there are so many people who need nutrition care, and there are very few in-person RDs. And so that's really the challenge. The other thing is a lot of times RDs in person aren't covered by insurance. And that is a huge challenge that we have been trying to tackle as clinicians for a long time. And it's sad, we know how important nutrition is, but it's just not covered in person all the time. So that's why we offer nutrition services virtually. Oftentimes they're fully covered by insurance because it's a virtual visit, and COVID has changed a lot of those rules and regulations in nutrition's favor. So a small silver lining to the pandemic there. So that's why seeing an RD through Foodsmart, it gets you in to see them faster. They have more time and availability to actually talk through these things with you versus just, well, go eat some veggies and good luck. We want to make sure that we're getting to the bottom of this. And really what your dietitian is doing is being a detective for you. They're not just, hearing you out and giving you a basic food plan. We want to build something with you that's feasible, but also helps you and lets you learn more about your health over time. So that's the real difference there, and why sometimes if you've had a bad experience with an RD in person, that could be why. It's a big factor there. Anything to add, Lindsay?
Yeah, no, that's great, Maddie. I think the only thing I would add is, when you're meeting with an RD about gut health, make sure you give them all the information from anyone you've met with previously, any other RDs, your doctor, your GI doctor, and you don't have to have it documented in a folder, but as we talked about, all of these kinds of things go into what the best approach is for your gut health. So, share that information with your dietitian, and it can help them better create something that works specifically for you, considering your overall health. All right. Let's see, a couple of questions. There's one about connection between gut health and Alzheimer's and dementia. So I mentioned a bunch in here, kind of cognition and memory. I won't go into the exact mechanisms because, to be honest, there's a lot of kind of outstanding research there. Obviously, we don't have a cure for that, but there have been some proven associations with Alzheimer's, dementia, and inflammation. So we did talk a lot today about inflammation and how inflammation either in the gut and its effect on production of certain chemicals and compounds that affect mood and memory is possible, and also how inflammation local to the gut can cause systemic inflammation, which means inflammation in and around the brain and the nervous system. So there is, I think a connection there with regards to inflammation, and having a healthy gut has been shown to reduce that inflammation. And so that's what I would say as far as, what we do know about that connection, and kind of where to focus if that's something of concern for you. Let's see. So many different probiotics. Can you simplify the process of choosing the best one? Yeah. So I know we didn't talk about probiotics in this first one. Maddie did go into it in the last webinar, but what I'll say about probiotics is that it can seem like an easy answer. And there are some generally well-tolerated ones. Lactobacillus and Bacteroides are the two kind of types of probiotics that I would look for. And then I would also look for diversity within that. So we know that multi-strain probiotics, so lots of different types of lactobacillus, for example, help add that diversity to your gut microbiome versus just a single type of probiotic. However, with that said, I would caution you to sort of go to your store or look online and just kind of order probiotics. I think it's much more beneficial to, again, speak with a dietitian or your doctor about getting some testing done, getting some understanding of what your personal microbiome looks like, and maybe some of the symptoms that you're having, some of the conditions that you might have before just getting probiotics. Because as we learned, and as someone here pointed out, you can't have too much of a good thing. So you may actually have perfectly fine levels of the probiotic that you're looking to take. But the issue could be maybe you have high levels of another type, or that are bad, or maybe you have low levels of another type that are good. And that's actually where you should be supplementing. So again, that gets really kind of micro focused. But again, I think my advice would be save your money. don't go out and buy a bunch of probiotics. Try some fermented foods. And if you really want to look into probiotics, I would work with a practitioner to find something that is specific for you. Anything you would add, Maddie?
I think that was beautifully said, Lindsay. The hardest thing about probiotics is everybody's body is so different. And if we were all the same, there would be an easy answer and we wouldn't have even needed to have this discussion with all of you today. And there's things that generally work well for some, and that's kind of what people gravitate towards on a population level. So like most people pick the same things and brands, but then for some people, those will never work great for them. So meeting with a practitioner, talking to your doctor about it, talking to an RD about it is the best way to go about this so that you're not wasting your money, wasting your energy, and then setting yourself up to be really disappointed with the results that you may or may not see.
Totally. Yeah. And like the lactobacillus ones are pretty well tolerated. So you may be able to take that and have no problems, but again, it may not be helping you. So it may not be something that you need to be doing. All right, let's see one more question. There's one about, is there a difference between the gut and microbiome between women versus men? Are there differences that are critical or to be aware of? I will say the short answer is yes, there are differences between women and men. Is there anything you would need to be aware of to like change your approach and what you might do as a male or female? Probably not. Not at this time. We don't know enough about what those differences mean, but there are differences. And we see differences in kind of clinical trials and how men and women respond to certain probiotics just based on gender, which is really interesting. So maybe something to keep an eye out for if you're interested, but probably nothing at this time that would, change what you would do. Let me see if there's one more. Gosh, you guys are really active. Any you see, Maddie?
I think we kind of covered this. Other question is, like what kind of like fiber supplements, Metamucil, those sorts of things can I take to help, not just pre and probiotics, but those fiber supplements. And really, there's a lot of questions about, can you become dependent on them? Is it a bad thing to use for now or for forever? My stance on that, and Lindsay, I'll let you jump in too, is everybody is so different. And I hate giving that answer because I know it's not an answer, but from a dietitian's perspective, it's so, so important to note that what works for my mother-in-law, for example, we talk about gut health all the time. What works for her right now might not work for my mom or my friend, or it might work for her right now. And that might not be a solution for her 2 months from now, 4 months from now. Gut health is ever changing and evolving. So really meeting with somebody and talking that through and being a detective of your own body and health is the best way to find out what is going to work or not work for you.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. I would agree. I think the only thing I'd add is like fiber supplements are generally okay to try out for yourself. And like, I'm losing my voice at the end of this, of course. Yeah, you can try things like Metamucil. There's something called sun fiber. There are a number of fiber supplements. I don't think there's research to show that you develop a dependency necessarily. So it can be a good and helpful thing to try, especially if you suffer from like constipation or any kind of IBS symptoms. You can try it out and see if it is helpful for you, because there is benefit to obviously that regular motility and keeping things moving. So it can be, a helpful thing to try, but I would agree with Maddie in that, like, not something you necessarily need to do. And certainly talking with practitioner about, what might be best for you is probably the best step. All right. Well, I think my voice is giving out on us. So probably a good time to wrap things up. But again, thank you all so much for joining. I'm glad that you learned so much. And yes, we will be sending this out. Make sure you schedule your visit for a chance to win the $250 prize. And check in next month because we'll be doing these monthly on a variety of topics. So thank you again.
Thanks, everybody. And we added that link in the chat for you one more time. Keep an eye on your email for the link to this recorded webinar and our previous one as well. And you will also have the scheduling link in that email too. So use the link in the chat or keep an eye out for your email and we'll chat with you next time.
Thank you guys. Bye.